Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Angels, Positivity, and Love. I'm your host, Michael Andre Ford, with yet another amazing guest with incredible insights. And I'd like to welcome Paul Sugar to the program.
Hey, Michael, how you doing today? It's a pleasure to be on your program.
Thank you very much, Paul. And Paul is in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we are so fortunate to have him here. Why? He is literally the quintessential student on human nature. He's got 50 plus years of mindfulness, consciousness background. He has taught at some of the premier places, Omega Institute, holding events in the past. He's accredited a bunch of different ways, whether it's UC San Diego, their medical center. Again, we're talking, if it's lingo, it's mindfulness-based stress reduction, if I got MBSR correct in terms of the acronym. But it's everything about the human experience slowing down for those folks who realize there's energy flowing. He helps them get back in touch with their center, get back in touch with their flows, get back in touch with their bigger self, so that they can navigate life more smoothly and more productively. He has had an incredible track record for a long time. Back in 1995, MBSR really wasn't the thing. He brought it to hospitals. He brought it to corporations. He brought it to other venues as well. So he's doing classes, pretty reasonably large classes. His work has reached into the public school systems in California and Georgia. He has had a long track record, and I have to thank Paul Sugar for being on the program. He's going to cover a little bit of his background, or a lot of his background, in a little bit, but I'm going to do some teasers. He was part of the Stargate program back in the 70s, I think it was, probably CIA remote viewing. If you guys remember the George Clooney film, Men Who Stare at Goats, which was a little embellished and stuff, but remote viewing. He's super sensitive. When he was young, an empath who was feeling everything and didn't have a way of setting boundaries and cutting it off. So that's what launched him, in a way, part of the reason why he launched onto his special spiritual journey, his life path, and has brought us such a wonderful professor. Makes it sound too stern. A wonderful student of life, again, the human experience, who is such a great expert who can teach us, again, how to find our center and so on. He went to Syracuse University at the same time that both my parents did. We met 2 years ago this March, and I had tried reaching out in 2016, 2018, as I will from time to time, by the thousands actually, for a virtual cup of tea or coffee. But we finally connected again in March of 2021. And I have to say, Paul and I have spent a lot of hours. I would put him, if it's an A6 intruder, if anyone remembers those old 1960s naval aviator planes, combat planes, side by side seating. He and I have done a lot of time together with Angels. He has been the biggest trooper, the most professional, been able to handle everything without even blinking. So I am here to seriously tout his skills. He's gotten built up quite a bit. I have to say, he can come across as serious, but at the same time, he's got a Billy Crystal laugh, a little Billy Crystal sparkle in his eye, and a lot of joy within. He loves his nature hikes, so I'm hoping we're going to hear about those. He's in Scottsdale, Arizona. Let's let Paul Sugar introduce himself a little bit and say hello a little bit longer on the program.
Yeah, so Michael, since the thrust of this show is really consciousness exploration and contemplation and meditation and so forth and so on, I thought a good way to introduce myself would be to just briefly tell everybody what got me into this particular field. And so looking back on my life, I realized that what really drove me in this direction was an unusual fear of dying, which I can remember having way back, as far back as maybe when I was 2 or 3 years old. I can really remember having this intense fear of dying. And in hindsight, looking back on my life, I realized that that fear which I always interpreted as being a very negative thing in my life, turned out to be a very positive thing in my life, because it brought me into this field of study, into this field of experience. And so I started to really bring things to a head, I guess, while I was in Syracuse University. Of course, I didn't know your parents there, but knew a lot of other people. And I was at Syracuse from 1965 to 1969. Now, things started to shift for me probably around 1968. And looking back on things, I had an experience driving to Syracuse. I guess it was in 1968, where I was in a terrible car accident. I was the only car on the highway involved in the accident, and it had just started raining. I was driving a 1966 Mustang, which had a proclivity to fishtailing. So, you know, the roads being slippery with new rain, I lost control of the car, and it started fishtailing, and it fishtailed to the point where it started to flip over. So it flipped over, from what I'm told, it flipped over 6 or 7 times. This is a super highway where you've got a median, but you've got cars going the other way on the other side. And as I was flipping over in the car, and of course I was not wearing a seatbelt, I had that experience that many people, I guess, have had, where my life actually flashed in front of me. It was like watching a movie. And I know that's what people say, but that's exactly what my experience was. I saw my entire life flash in front of me like a movie. And I just figured I was dead. And so I let go of the steering wheel, and I just waited for the inevitable, which I thought at the moment was dying. Well, finally, the car stopped flipping over. And I thought I had rolled over into the other lane with the oncoming traffic. So for a few moments, I waited for the oncoming traffic to smack into me and finally put me away and kill me. But that didn't happen. So I looked around. It turned out that the car had settled on the median. There was a grass median in between the two directions of the highway. And the door was up above me because the car was on the side. I remember it was raining. And so I grabbed an umbrella from the back of the car, and I opened up the door, and I climbed out of the car with the umbrella. There were cars that had stopped, and people who were watching this whole thing. And they couldn't believe that there was somebody coming out of the car with an umbrella over his head. So anyway, I got out of the car, and just a couple scrapes on my back. In fact, a friend of mine drove out to help me out. He had a camera, so I've got probably 100 pictures of the accident. And so that was my near-death experience, where my life actually unraveled right there in front of me. And that seemed to be a starting point for my shift into the study of life, as you mentioned, the study of the human condition and the experience of the human condition. Because right after that experience, I started to get interested in consciousness studies. My girlfriend at the time gave me a book on Edgar Cayce. And so I started reading about Edgar Cayce, which completely gave me a whole new perspective on possibilities in life. And then from reading about Edgar Cayce, I started to read about other meditation forms and so forth and so on, different traditions. At the time, I had experimented a little bit with hallucinogen psychedelics, which I know have become very, very popular nowadays, particularly in the field of mental health, using psychedelics in many different ways to bolster up mental health and bring people into a deeper understanding of who they are. So I had some interesting experiences with psychedelics and hallucinogens and so forth and so on. Got to meet Timothy Leary when he came to give a lecture at my anthropology class at Syracuse, and so continued being very, very interested in consciousness and being, all the existential questions that we ask. And then in 1969, I ended up going to summer school at Syracuse to take a course that I had always wanted to take. And so I ended up going to Woodstock. Woodstock was happening that summer. It was right down the thruway from Syracuse. So a couple friends of mine and I drove to Woodstock, and we spent, of course, the 3 days there. When I came back from Woodstock, I bumped into an old girlfriend of mine who had joined a yoga study group, and also a study group that was involved in studying the Kaballah. Now, the Kabbalah is the esoteric, the mystical tradition of Judaism. And so I became very interested in studying and practicing yoga, using the Kabbalah system for stimulating various consciousness understandings and things like that. And of course, mindfulness. Mindfulness came into the picture around that time as well. So this is 1969, where I begin to combine an approach to transforming my experience by using yogic meditation and contemplation, Kabbalistic meditation and contemplation, and mindfulness meditation and contemplation as well. Mindfulness, of course, being that skill set that allows us to keep our attention in the present moment. And I found that mindfulness was really the common denominator of all of the different meditative and contemplative traditions that I had been studying for the last year or two as I was getting more and more interested in this field. So mindfulness really became a centerpiece for what I was doing. But I also found that the Kabbalah, using the symbols of the Kabbalah and the various meditations, those symbols were stimulating something inside of me, where through my meditations and my contemplations, I started to have a lot of visions and, shall we say, out of the body experiences that went on for probably, at least 20 years, where, started out with the visions, where I was starting to have, oddly enough, Christian types of visions with Jesus and things like that. And of course, being brought up Jewish, it was very unusual for me to start having visions with Jesus, although I guess Jesus was Jewish, so maybe there was a common denominator there. And then going into flashbacks from different existences and things like that, not just lives from what seemed to be here in this planet, but lives elsewhere as well. And then eventually, I ended up having these experiences where I would jump into these experiences as sort of out of the body experiences. And it was like going to a school, and this was happening at least 2 or 3 times a week at night, of course, while I was sleeping. It's probably going on more than that, but that was what I remember, at least 2 or 3 times a week, going to this school that was teaching me essentially how the universe worked.
Well, Paul, let's get to the school part in just a second, but you've already hit on a lot of themes and a lot of stuff, amazing stuff. Can you share with us one of the pleasant visions that sticks out? Maybe the setting. You don't have to get into all the detail unless you want to get into the detail. I'm sure viewers would want to hear about that in detail, but share what you're comfortable sharing. Take us through one of the visions first, and then let's get to the nighttime classes. I love to say nighttime university classes. And for the audience listening, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be steeped and accredited and everything else, but you can ask your angel crew, your team, your supporting group for university classes. You don't have to worry about the details. You don't have to worry about, are you going to get an A? Are you going to get an F? Or are you even going to go to the class? You just fall asleep at night and trust that it's happening. And maybe you remember, maybe you don't. Paul's going to share more about the classes in a second, but share one of your visions with us. Give us some flavor. What's one of the most strong ones that you still fondly think back to in the middle of a hike? You're in Arizona. You've got some beautiful surroundings. Take us through one of those visions if you could.
Yeah, well, probably the one that sticks with me the most is a vision that I had with Jesus, where Jesus was standing there. He was dressed in white robes, in a white robe, and I couldn't really see his face because his face was white light, and he was dipping his toe in the water. There was like a little river in front of him. He was dipping his toe in the river and just standing there. And in the vision, I was standing there with him, just sort of exchanging energy, as it were. And as you know, probably most visions don't really last that long, although they can seem to be lasting long at the time. And so when I left that particular vision, it really stayed with me, and it has stayed with me for over 50 years. And it seems like it's very fresh still, it just happened, or it's happening right now. The sense of time and space, it changes. It changed for me as I went deeper and deeper into my meditation practices and my consciousness practices and so forth and so on. So the deeper I went into that, the more I started to realize that time and space were very relative terms.
And we're about to get to the nighttime classes part, and thank you for that beautiful sharing. You've been doing this a long time, and as decades go by and you look back, is it getting simpler and you're shedding some of the structure, the lingo from way back? You already shed that back in the 80s, looking back at the 70s and the 60s. Can you tell us a little bit of how things have shifted? You and I met, it would be this March, it would be 2 years ago, 2021. And like I said, I was trying to sing your props or praises at the beginning of the show. You have done the most of any person out of thousands. Time with me, letting go, experiencing. You sort of are basically like, got it, what's next? Sometimes with a twinkle in the eye and a laugh. Other times you're just ready to go on the next thing. So you've been one of the most focused, studied, but allowing and balanced people I've met. So again, I'm singing your praises. Hope your ears are ringing or whatever's burning. But tell us how your perspective has shifted over 50 plus years now. Has it shifted, or is it still all kind of wondrous, or are you constantly catching yourself from settling on any one perspective?
Well, let's see. That's a big question. Well, my perspective has definitely changed. But it didn't change overnight, for sure. It's been a gradual change over the past 50 some odd years. And back in 1993, I sort of shifted my studies away from the Kabbalah and yoga and so forth, and really began to focus more deeply into the mindfulness practice, and started teaching that. I had been teaching my blend of yoga, Kabbalah, and mindfulness from 1970 to 1993. But in 93, I decided to just practice and teach the mindfulness. And so the deeper I went into the mindfulness, which once again is that present moment experience, the more I actually entered into that present moment experience, where there's really no past per se, no future per se. I mean, it literally is the present moment. And what comes along with that present moment experience is a deep sense of peace, and contentment, and a lot of other qualities that I believe are naturally there in the human condition. Qualities like love and compassion and empathy and forgiveness and gratitude and appreciation and so forth and so on. To me, those qualities were always present inside of me, but what happened was, as I went more deeply into the present moment through my mindfulness practice, all the other stuff kind of dropped away. And what was left to present itself were those positive qualities. And so probably a good synopsis of what mindfulness did for me was it took me out of the fear mode finally, because we are hardwired in that fight or flight response to have fear come up when we feel like our survival is being threatened. And what with my deep-seated fear of dying, which was with me, at a very early age, and probably I was born with it, I carried it forward into many, many years in my life. And I think the icing on the cake with mindfulness was that it actually brought me into the final stages of overcoming that fear of dying and all of the different iterations of fear, anger and hostility and frustration, on all the negative emotions we experience, I think, are different expressions, different iterations of that fear of dying. And so over the years, I could probably safely say that I've become a specialist in death and dying because I had to confront it myself. And so it brought me to that point of peace and contentment and stillness and silence and all of those other positive emotions. And so that's really been the shift. That's been the deep change that's taken place over the years of my practice.
I love it. So we're going to get back to nighttime university classes in just a second, but let's shift gears a little bit. First of all, stressbeaters.com is Paul Sugar's website. He's in Scottsdale, Arizona. I believe he lives on Geronimo Trail. And I'll ask him, stress beaters, like I'm beating the heat. Stress beaters, StressBeaters.com. You'll see it on the lingo underneath the video. But let me go sideways and do what I've done to every guest who comes on the show. They've all met angels with me, guides, and so on. So I'm going to ask a redundant question. Paul, do angels exist?
Yes, I do believe that they exist, and I can safely say that I've had my own experiences with them.
How about sharing one with us?
Sure.
And I would do a lot of drinking of water too if I was in his shoes, just to pull it together. Angel experiences are big.
Right. Gulp. The big gulp. The big gulp.
Exactly.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I started to have visions. I guess it was in 1969 when I came to the practice of yoga and mindfulness and the Kabbalah. And I talked about the vision of Jesus and so forth. I've had many, many other visions, and a lot of them have to do actually with angels. And I know, Michael, with your angels, they have very specific looks and identities and so forth and so on. With mine, they were of a different nature. First of all, they were huge. when I saw the angels, they were humongous, just, huge beings, so to speak. And what always strikes me when I see that kind of appearance are the wings. The wings are always omnipresent for me, and they're of course huge. I rarely see the face, but I always see the wings, and sometimes I hear the flapping of the wings as well. And so those kinds of things have stayed with me over the years. I've been having those kinds of experiences for over 50 years and continue to have them to this day. And so that's how they appear to me. And whatever you want to call them, angels or guides or helpers or beings, whatever you're comfortable with, that's been my experience.
So fire and brimstone sized, like oversized, a good 20 feet tall, and not imposing, but make sure when you see them, you pay attention. You're not going to miss it.
Right.
They've got your full everything.
Yeah.
And that's very, I don't like to say the word common, but very regular in terms of the experiences a lot of people have. Now, you've met and seen and heard angels for a long time with me now. When you do it with me, it's a little softer and gentler and kinder and much more down to size, minus a few figures here and there that are having fun. Audrey Hepburn does it with a little bit of pizzazz when she undoes her wings. Could you describe the difference, or at least in the last couple of years, the more friendly version? I mean, it's all unconditional love, and it's really at the time getting you to pay attention. Talk to us just a little bit about even a lighter, with a capital L, a lighter side to this when you see, hear, and feel in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, when I'm working with you and your group, it seems more personal. There's a development of a personal relationship with them, whereas with the experiences that I have had for the many years, there's more like they're kind of just there. They're just watching me, sharing their energy and presence with me. And so there's really no personal interaction per se, like there is when I'm working with the group that you work with. And that's probably the main difference. There is the personal connection.
I love it. And thank you for mentioning that. Okay, let's talk t-shirts. And when I say t-shirts, bumper stickers. And when I say bumper stickers, let's talk short slogans. So you've gone down this tremendous path. And I'm not kidding when I talk accreditation, where you've spoken, how many panels you've been on. You're like and I hate to name any other figures out there on the landscape because you're Paul Sugar, but John Kabat-Zinn would sort of be in the landscape. And again, you've cut your own path and so on. But talk to us in terms of short mantras, a t-shirt quote. What can the viewer take away right now? Life is simpler than we realize. Give us some insights, the core nuggets. What can a person turn to their spouse tonight and say, oh my God, I'm watching this show with Paul Sugar, and essentially he wants us to remember this, this, and this. What's short and sweet right now that you can tell us along the way? What are some of the insights, the wisdom here from Paul Sugar?
Well, once you've put your 2 feet firmly on this particular path, I think the direction that you're headed, and certainly the direction that I moved in, was overcoming fear. To me, that is the central challenge of the human experience. And I'm going to repeat that because it's so important. It's the main lesson that I've learned in my life, that the central challenge in the human condition is understanding, confronting, and overcoming the fear of dying. This is central in probably all of the various meditative and contemplative traditions that have existed for thousands of years. And I'm here to tell you that I can agree and verify, through my own experience, the truthfulness of all of these different traditions. And so as I put my 2 feet on that path of overcoming my fear of dying, that's when everything really started to happen and unfold for me. And so I know from my experience that to the extent that you're able to study and understand and meditate on and experience what it's like to die, you'll be able to explore consciousness and being. All of those existential questions were answered for me when I opened up to understanding and overcoming that fear of death.
Beautiful. I have 2 thoughts. One's the gymnastics movie. It's like a Disney movie, an adult Karate Kid called Peaceful Warrior. Dan Millman's story. The book was Way of the Peaceful Warrior. But the movie's not going to ruin the book won't ruin the movie. And again, it's like an adult Karate Kid type film. There's a deleted scene on the DVD, and you could just YouTube this. Nick Nolte was the gas station attendant, the Mr. Miyagi figure, the Zen master.
Yeah, I remember that.
Possibly an angel, and possibly people have met him, but buy Dan's books, go to his seminars. So there's a gas station attendant, and then Dan's story when he was a sophomore, I think at Berkeley or so. Amazing gymnast, wins the NCAAs for the team, but goes through a motorcycle accident. They tell him he's not going to walk again, goes on to the Olympics and so on. So it's very much like an adult Karate Kid. The point of this is there's a deleted scene where the gas station attendant is walking with the student, Dan Millman, and they touch upon death. And that it's really no different than puberty, a slight transition, but not a big deal. It's a beautiful scene for anybody who's interested in hearing it a certain way. It's got a vibration with it. It's always stuck out in my mind. Again, deleted scene, bus stop, farewell to Socrates. That's the nickname just given to the gas station attendant because he's very philosopher looking out of Greece. And I have to mention another angel quote here that came in 2014 from Abe, the Abraham of old, the biblical Abraham. I had to Wikipedia him. I am the worst at this. I was the last candidate for this, but I'm very enthusiastic. So this is Abe, an angel, the Abraham of old, saying, basic questions are eternal and a key part of what it is to be human. And he was referring to the question, what about compassion in mankind? And I think that's what we're touching on here. The basic eternal questions about what it is to be human, the fear of death, overcoming your fears, learning to be in your heart, learning to live. And with that, what's one at least t-shirt you would love to print up and offer for free to thousands of people, and you would have helpers to ship them out, and it wouldn't cost you a dime? What would it say on the shirt if you could get one shirt out there, or a bumper sticker?
Well, it's funny you ask, because I was just given a t-shirt as a gift. And on the front of it, it says heavily meditated. When I wear that shirt out, I go to the grocery store or whatever, people take a look at it quickly. And of course, they read heavily medicated. And I get, I'll get conversations from people. Yeah, I'm on this medication and that medication too. I understand what it's like to be heavily medicated. And I'll say, we'll take another look at the shirt. And, oh, I'm so embarrassed, heavily meditated. So I would like to use that as an illustration for what I think is the importance of having a regular meditation practice. I use mindfulness as the core practice for my meditations, but I still will use other traditions, meditations from other traditions as well, just out of curiosity and interest, and to keep myself educated as to what's out there. But mindfulness is really the hub of the wheel for me. The spokes on that wheel could be the the different approaches to meditation. But mindfulness is the hub, and it's what keeps the spokes in alignment and working together and more effective. So I guess my bumper sticker would say heavily meditated, and ask me what that means. And what I'll say that means is that it's very wise to have a regular meditation practice. It'll benefit you tremendously and hold you in good stead throughout your entire life.
I love it. Thich Nhat Hanh, in his little book, Peace is Every Step, really suggests that everything can be your meditation, or everything can be your instruction. That's probably more there, Pema children. But even talks about doing the dishes, how if you just slow down, you can actually enjoy it. So I know that the Native American chiefs that people meet, and you can meet Thich Nhat Hanh, talk about sometimes just get to the task, get through it, and return back to your mindfulness here. There's certain tasks you're not going to be sold on as a mindful experience. If you could, and you had a couple sons or daughters, you're like, yeah, it's a really mindful experience, go walk the dog. So it's there for us at all times. Do you want to give us some samples? And you're a great instructor for a long time now. You love groups. You've been doing this a long time. You've brought it to different organizations, public school systems. Can you give us some samples, ways we can slow down during our day to take advantage of our own inner stillness, our authenticity, our inner power? There's a million ways to say our being, our heart. What could you give us on a show? Just a couple little quick ones.
Well, the practice of mindfulness is very, very simple. And so I would suggest that. And the practice of mindfulness, and I, believe it or not, I am answering your question. It's just it's just going to be in a little bit of a roundabout way. But with mindfulness, paying attention moment by moment on purpose, but in a very, very particular way. And so with mindfulness, what do we pay attention to? We pay attention to the body. So what does the body include? It includes the physical sensations, the five senses, the breath, thoughts, the emotions. And so in a typical mindfulness meditation practice, those are the things you would be paying attention to. The breath, the thoughts, the emotions, the five senses, the physical sensations, and so forth, which is why Thich Nhat Hanh talks about being able to bring the skill set of mindfulness into everyday practice. And this is how mindfulness is different from other meditation practices. Pretty much all of the other meditation practices that I have done take me into different experiences away from what's going on right here in my body in the present moment. They're really designed to allow us to experience, shall we say, altered state, different states of consciousness, which is part of our exploration. And it's important to be able to explore all of these different states of awareness and consciousness and so forth. And that's where these different meditations are very valuable to us. But with mindfulness is very different. And so instead of going to our happy place, we're bringing our happy place into our body. And so very, very different in that sense, almost opposite from all the other meditation practices. That's why Thich Nhat Hanh says we can do this while we're washing the dishes, brushing the teeth, so forth and so on. Because really at its core, all mindfulness is the ability to keep one's attention in the present moment, using the body as the connecting point to the present moment, remembering that the body is truly the gateway into the present moment experience. And so you don't have to do formal meditation. You can if you want, but you can bring that skill set. So for example, washing the dishes, you're smelling the soap, you're touching the dishes, you're using your five senses, you're looking at the dishes, you're completely present with washing the dishes. Same thing with walking or any activity that you're doing during the day. It's really all about that experience of pure attention that has been, lack of a better word, embodied. And one of the many things that I've discovered in my practice is that for most people, they're not really fully connected to their bodies. And that's what creates a lot of the problems. It's almost as if the body senses when we're connected and when we're not. And when it senses that we're not connected, it's not really comfortable with that. And there's a lot of fear that comes up. And so for a lot of us, we're not connected for a large part of our lives. And in many cases, we actually get stuck in that disconnection due to fear and so forth and so on. But using the mindfulness practice brings us back into the body. And so it's the reverse thing. It's as if the body then senses that we are connecting and connected to, and that's when the fear goes away because it puts the body at ease. And so now, finally, to answer your question.
And this is good.
Yeah, I would say the simplest thing that you can do in your full stride of your day is to bring your attention to your breath, because your breath is always part of your body, and therefore it's always present. And through the medium of the breath, you're going to connect more deeply with your body. It's going to put your body at ease, and therefore you're going to feel more at ease as well. It's going to reduce the fear experience. And once the fear experience is reduced, you're going to be able to relate and experience things in a whole new way.
You mentioned brushing your teeth, and I had to laugh because that was the thing I'm trying to keep at the forefront of up here to bring it up, because there's a lot of different ways that if you pump the brakes, you can just experience what you've always been experiencing, but half the time you miss it, or most of the time you miss it. 99% of the time you miss it. It's right in front of you. You're doing it all day long. It could be flipping a light switch. It could be anything, doing the dishes and just noticing the suds. Your family members might think you're on drugs because you're like, oh my God, I'm seeing rainbow light in the suds and I'm loving this. And you put a little suds on the loved one. Okay. But I'm brushing my teeth from time to time. And I have noticed over the years that there are these bubbles, and I get into it and I feel one with all, and it's just brushing my teeth, and the crest or whatever I'm using is turning it all white with extra bubbles, and it's gorgeous. And that is a meditative moment for me when I remember to remember, if I remember to remember. And I'm slaughtering somebody Rinpoche. Songyal Rinpoche said, remember to remember. There's nothing I say at this end that's unique to me. Chogyam Trungpa probably gave me that one. But I'm at a bookstore one time and a book fell off a shelf. Twice this happened. One was Sai Baba. I'd never heard of the guy from India. The one from 100 years ago that you've talked to, this fellow, and he's a miracle worker. That photo will move for folks if they want to go to my website and look on the front page. We'll get to that in a little bit with Paul. A book fell off the shelf, and everyone writes, if you're in the Buddhist lineage or you're an author or a teacher, I think it's an obligatory thing to write the Tibetan Book of Dying, your version, translation. It's just everybody does it. So somebody had wisely grabbed Songyal Rinpoche to do the introduction to this book, and it falls off on the ground. And being a good American, not British, I felt obligated to put it back up on the shelf. But it turns to, of course, the page that I see, and it says, for 35 years, I've been teaching my students, remember to remember. And I'll do a Chogyam Trungpa quote. And since, again, I'm very American, when I first met him, even though he's passed over for quite some time now, I think 1987 or 88, I was like, boy, that's a mouthful for a name. What can we call you? And he said, call me Gentle Frank. So I've been calling him Gentle Frank ever since. Now, I am slaughtering the lingo, the terms, the proper way to do things. And yet somehow I'm still getting there once in a while. Once in a while, I hit the mark. So Chogyam Trungpa talks about how now is always the occasion, and that I wrote it down. The breath, taking one breath is like taking one step. Taking one breath is like taking a step. Both bring peace and harmony. So could you take it from there? You have done this up and down, inside and out, on panels. You've taught it at Omega. You've done 100+ pages of blogs that you're hopefully going to turn into a very short book for us all in the next year or so with no effort. You have watched people awaken. You've gone through your own awakening, to use a term maybe we shouldn't be using, but just being present. Talk to us about cultivating this authenticity that some will say, your inner you, your bigger you, tell us more about how can we really slow down? Is it not on the iPhone?
Well, to me, there's nothing wrong with technology, including iPhones. To me, what's happening right now with all of the stress that's being created with technology and iPhones and so forth and so on, is we just haven't learned how to build a positive relationship with the technology yet. I think at some point down the road, the human family will finally figure out how to more positively use and relate to technology. But for now, we're still figuring it out. So it's causing us a lot of stress. It's taking us out of the moment. It's disconnecting us from our bodies, from the present moment, so to speak. Remembering once again that the body is the gateway into the present moment for us in this human experience that we're having. So
you've talked about running and how running is a meditation. You've talked about how sports can be the opening and pretty much anything, but talk to us about running specifically. Like, I'll throw out a tidbit. I've always not very seriously, I've said this, but jokingly as well, because I love the double entendre, the je ne sais quoi, the conflict in the words, the duality. You have to go slow to run fast.
Okay. So the slowness, yes, that was your original question before I got off on a tangent.
Oh, you're good.
How do we embrace that slowness? Okay, the slowness, and in some descriptions, the stillness. A lot of people talk about entering the stillness and the silence, but we can use slowness. It's really the same deal. The slowness, the stillness, the silence is the nature of the present moment. You don't need to create it. It's already there. There are just things that have come in our way, that have been put between us and our true natures. And so once we begin to recognize that through the various means that are available to us, the various traditions of meditation and contemplation and so forth, once we embrace that and embark on that journey, we begin to experience what our true natures are. Gradually, slowly, all of the dross, the unnecessary stuff begins to fade away, to fall away. And what is left is our true nature, which is that silence and stillness and slowness, which allows us to experience life in a whole new way through that stillness and slowness and silence. And that's what you hear about in sports. Athletes were probably one of the first to bring the experience of the present moment into our culture. Now, they call it different things. They call it flow states, being in the zone, peak performance. But if you read between the lines, what they're really describing is the present moment experience, the embodied present moment experience. And been a lot of studies along those lines. And so what we're seeing nowadays are athletes, professional athletes, amateur athletes, all kinds of athletes who are wondering, how did I get into this flow state? Because most of them just kind of stumble into it and they don't know how they got there. But what people are learning nowadays is that there actually is a conscious way of entering into these flow states, and it is the practice of mindfulness. Everything that's described in these sports stories, the experiences that the athletes are having through sports, but of course, it's not just sports, it's anything that you do. Anything you can do, you can have that flow state experience. But for some reason, these athletes stumbled upon it sooner than the general population did. And so a lot of these athletes now have come to mindfulness and are practicing mindfulness. And you can read about it. Lots of sports teams who are making this part of their regimen, part of their mental, emotional, and physical training, because being in these flow states has a profound effect, not just on your mentality and your emotions, but on your physical being as well. It's across the board, physical, mental, and emotional.
And I'd like to remind the viewer that they've experienced this many times, even throughout the day, without necessarily being aware of it. But also throughout their childhood, if you need to go back that far for athletics, maybe you're playing tennis still today or doing something else. But when the time sped up or slowed down on the field, I'm going to use a soccer analogy. You were really good in third grade or high school or college or professionally or community soccer, and just you're having the day of your life. You're on the field. You knew where everybody was. You just were Pele in that moment. You felt it, and either time sped up or it slowed down, and you navigated everything and bang, goal. And it could be anything else, and it might not be sports. It's what Paul just said. You're sitting at a restaurant and you're just so relaxed. And restaurants are such great settings. First, to also see auras around people, or theaters as well. You know, pick a victim 3 rows down, do so respectfully, and see their aura, let go. You can see Paul's in this video if you're the type that's like, yeah, cliff, bungee cord, bridge, jump, I'll do it. I'll jump off a cliff. That's suggesting a lot. But Paul's flowing a lot of light right now. So back to the restaurant analogy, you're sitting in a restaurant, you're having chicken, but it tastes like 10 chickens. And you're just sitting there saying, oh my God, what a miracle this chicken is. It's so delicious. Whatever your usual refrain is when you're on cloud 9 eating chicken or a salad or just some dressing that's incredible. So you're experiencing this all the time. The question is, are you paying attention? Are you doing so from the heart? Are you up here? Easiest thing in the world. There's a million ways to be up here and not do what you're supposed to do, to let go, to be in your heart, to live. And that was the point in Peaceful Warrior: living, unconditional love, conditionality, unconsciousness, consciousness. Not all thinking is bad, but when it is functioning in a cool way that we would all of us would agree to, that's when you know, the jukebox starts playing a song, the pinball machine goes off, you get an extra play. It's when all the good stuff happens. It's down here. Paul, share with us maybe an event in the past. Haven't you spoken at like Chopra Center, been on a stage with folks, or one of those institutes? Share with us what people can turn to you. If it was an event, where would you, what would be the topics you loved bringing up? It's everything that we've talked about. Tell us some of the big picture topics. If you were to put 3 books out, you had to, somebody gave you a big paycheck, what would the 3 books probably be focused on?
Well, for sure, mindfulness would be book number 1, because I mentioned that my experience tells me that it's the hub of the wheel, the human wheel of experience. There's a lot of different spokes, you know, on that wheel, but what keeps the spokes aligned and interacting positively together is the hub. And mindfulness is that hub. It's that ground of being, so to speak. It's pure being. And as you say, it's all about remembering. You know, you can forget, and when you're in the beginning stages of your practice, when you've really just embarked on connecting to this particular experience, one of the hardest things is to remember to actually be in the present moment, because the patterns that we've developed in our lives are such that we tend to be distracted and not stay focused, and so forth and so on. And that's a long story. But distraction becomes part of the human experience unless you're able to change that pattern. And you can change that pattern through the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness really goes deep to the point where it completely reorients the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, which to me is really the master switch in the body. I've heard people talk about the brain being the master switch, the heart, different centers, the vagus nerve. All of those are important centers in the body, but to me, the master switch is the autonomic nervous system because it equates to the unconscious. And it's the unconscious that oversees all of those other functions in the body. And mindfulness really goes a long way to completely reorienting and bringing back into balance and then into the flow states, the autonomic nervous system. Flow states come from that autonomic nervous system as it becomes more and more balanced and conscious, actually. It's when the unconscious becomes conscious.
So is mindfulness a little bit like a match in that it lights your candle, gets you into your heart, helps unlock everything else? And that's that hub of the wheel at the center of all the spokes that Paul is talking about. Now, Paul also has another way to look at stuff that makes everything pretty simple. It's easy. I mean, you've talked about, and I've seen it in your writings, whether it's your blogs and other stuff about past lives. There's a lot of details out there. We have plenty of details in our current life. Situation, drama, we're carrying decades around of experiences. A lot of them not so hot are how we identify roles, jobs, relationships, and we carry it on our backs. And there's more. Again, details, situations, past lives, all sorts of stuff. And isn't it now your recommendation is to get past the detail and go straight through this method, or not even a method, forget the structure, get past the structure, get past the words, get past the details, get to here, get to the awareness, get to the mindfulness. Can you talk to us about letting go of all the details, that it's not about the details?
Yeah, that's something that I discovered over time. It really, I know I'm just repeating what you said, but it's not about the details. There's an old saying, God is in the details, and there's truth to that. But like so many other true sayings, the opposite is true too. It's not about the details. It is about the details, but it's not about the details. And past lives, things like that, those are all secondary, I've discovered. And what's primary is that ground of being, that present moment attention, that pure consciousness. That's really, as you said, with the match example, it's what illuminates everything else. It's almost as if when we approach that first principle, I'm really into first principles. When I go into a subject, I keep peeling away the layers of the onion until I get to the first principle. And the first principle is that pure state of being, that pure consciousness that is there with the present moment experience. That's something that I was able to discover as I went deeper and deeper into the present moment. I realized that, hey, this is a state of being that's always been here, and that illuminates and brings understanding to all the other details. So shall we call them secondary experiences? I mean, they're just as important, but they get illuminated and there's deeper understanding of them if you're coming at them through that first principle, through that primary ground of being that's always been there, and when you're in that experience, you realize, hey, this has always been there. It's always going to be there. And this is where I want to anchor myself. And this is how I want to relate to all the other different experiences in my life, all the details. So details aren't important, but they are important, but we want to be able to relate to them from that ground of being, from that primary experience of consciousness.
So state of being here state of mind up there. And I always like to joke that the thinking, generally a lot of thinking is just egoic thinking or a waste of energy. I love that Joshu quote. I know you love a lot of philosophers, ancient Greece, others, East Asian, and so on. But Joshu has this one where the student comes running up to the master, and the student's trying to show that he's arrived here. He's present. And he says, what if I seek to be Buddha? And the Zen master says, what a tremendous waste of energy. And so the student's a quick one. He's not going to give up. He wants to show that he's still there and he can do it. He says, well, what happens if I don't waste any energy? And then the master says, and then you are Buddha. So it's a lot going on here. The more you try, the more you're probably going to miss the mark further. I'm going to mention Soul Surfer for a modern cultural film, Bethany Hamilton in Hawaii. Fantastic surfer, gets her arm bitten off by a shark and goes through the turmoil we go through, whether it's our Mustang we mentioned at the beginning of the show, flipping around and around. There's a lot of, PTSD, a lot of trauma, a lot of this. Why did it happen to me? How did it happen? A lot of positives that can come out of this stuff. But what I'm saying with Bethany is she went through a lot of turmoil, not realizing she could be a better surfer out of it all. You think one arm missing means you can't surf again. Au contraire. But it took her a while to arrive at that conclusion on her own. And there's a scene in the movie with the actress playing Bethany Hamilton where she suddenly has the realization that she hasn't lost a beat. She hasn't skipped a step. She still has all the capability, and she's present in her heart. And she turns to her mom standing on the beach. It's Holly Hunt, Helen Hunt, whichever famous actress that is. And she says, Mom, oh my God, I'm over it. What do I do now? And the mom just turns and says, love as much as you can, and the rest will follow. But I'm not getting the words just right. So it's not about the details. And Paul has hit that one on the head, hit that nail on the head. Can you talk to us, though, about limiting beliefs? And that just is pretty much the details in a different way. We're up here on a different wavelength. How a person's hearing this, they might be nodding their head and saying, he's right, or checking boxes. But how is this more like the light switch on the wall? I mean, they perform Olympic level. All of us, when we hit a light switch, we just do it. I'm not analyzing the light switch I hit from 2 Tuesdays ago. And I've told you before the show, oh my God, Paul, I'm not sure I did it right. I've stayed up 3 nights in a row, sleepless, agonizing over the light switch that I hit. Did I do it fast enough? Did I do it too slow? We're performing actions all the time, like Olympians. We're in our heart, but we give ourselves no emotional credit, no celebratory, oh my God, life is so beautiful, tears streaming down from our eyes. How do we shed what we know? How do we get out of our ruts, our habits, our trends, our limiting beliefs? How do we, a little bit of the surrender stuff, I suppose. Give us a pep talk on this. It's simpler than we think. It's not about thinking.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I could go on for hours about this. Well, first, how do we do it? Well, fear is the impediment. Fear is the impediment. So you need to be addressing fear in whatever way you're approaching whatever it is you're approaching. Fear is what creates all the issues for us. And it's interesting that you also mentioned the mind. And there's a lot of people out there. I've had thousands of them coming through my classes. A lot of people who are bothered by their minds because they've got, obsessive thinking and negative thinking and so forth and so on, which in my experience, my exploration of the mind, I discovered that once again, all of that compulsion, obsession, negativity in the mind is driven by fear. And as my fear diminished, my mind gradually calmed down, slowed down, and I discovered what I believe to be the true nature of the mind, which is stillness, peace, and silence. And so I've gotten to a point where really the only time I'm thinking is when I choose to think. So there's 2 questions. I'm choosing, number one, what do I want to think about? And now I'm going to choose to think about that particular subject. And so other than choosing when to think and when not to think, I'm kind of just in that stillness. I always get the image of shifting a car into neutral and just letting the engine idle. And that's where I enjoy spending a lot of my time. I shift my car into neutral. I let the engine idle, and I'm just kind of hanging out, enjoying being and whatever's happening from moment to moment. If I need to use my mind, then I figure out how do I need to use it, and now I'm going to use it. When I'm done using my mind, I just put it to rest again and go back into that pure awareness, so to speak.
Now, for stressbeaters.com, that's your website. This is Paul Sugar in Scottsdale, Arizona, who's a 50-plus year mindfulness consciousness educator. He's gone down a very personal, detailed path himself, experiencing a lot of different, let's just say, amazingness in terms of the universe. What's in us and around us might be multidimensional. We might have to touch on that later. But how can a person tiptoe in and say, okay, I don't even know how to take a nap during the day. I'm having difficulty, but I get this and I know I need to slow down. Is there something on the website they should look for? Is there an introductory consult they can do by Zoom? They can hire you one-on-one? I know you do great medium-sized classes. I know what you're doing for the public education systems in like Georgia and California, but give some basic starting steps that a person can take when they hit your website.
Yeah, well, you're right. And by the way, my school mindfulness program is in, I think we're in 40 states right now.
Oh, holy cow. So is it in the millions for students now?
Yeah, we're up to about 2.5 million students and teachers and parents and so forth and so on. We try to involve the whole community.
Probably needed now more than ever without doing any commentating on anything else. But mindfulness, if it's stillness, doesn't need to be about words. Bravo. Okay, yeah. So a person, should they contact you for a one-on-one consult? Is there a specific class they should maybe consider signing up for where it's a group? Because you've talked about how group settings, and this may be more in person in the Arizona or neighboring areas, Scottsdale and other neighboring like Phoenix cities, where in a group setting, there's a group energy, a group collective where it's easier to let go and just be like, I'm here.
Yeah, I prefer to work in groups. I do some one-on-one work when it seems appropriate. But like you said, I find that working in groups is much more beneficial. You get the advantage of the energy from the group. You get the cross-pollination of different people asking different questions and opening up new directions of thinking and being and so forth and so on. So for that reason, I like the groups. And my go-to is an 8-week program that John Kabat-Zinn pioneered back in the late 70s that I got trained and certified in. And I now actually certify other people to teach that program. I work through the University of California, San Diego's medical school. They have a training center there. And so I work with people all over the world, teaching them how to teach that particular 8-week program. I find it's a good catch-all for bringing people into that mindfulness experience. And it's completely secular. So it has nothing to do with any particular religious or spiritual tradition at all. In fact, it was designed to be brought in and be part of the healthcare system, the healthcare delivery system. So the way I've taught it has always been through the emphasis of how does this particular experience of mindfulness help you in your physical, mental, and emotional health. And I inevitably expand it into many, many other areas, with some that we've talked about, like bringing it into schools. I've also brought it into the prison system, into the military, corporations, as far as creativity and performance. And so it's got a lot of other benefits to it. But my main thrust is usually as a healthcare delivery system in helping people to feel better physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Nice. And yeah, secular. I'm not into rectangles. I get you on secular.
Yeah,
Okay,
I got it.
exactly. So now if I'm going to put a different hat on you, you would have never said this in your lifetime. So this should be unique. You're a bit of a referee in that you've seen all the different cultural influences out there, whether it's India, Transcendental Meditation, all the different meditations, those spokes we talked about, the Buddhist thing, this thing, the John Kabat-Zinn thing. I mean, obviously that's a good one. Having tasted so many different restaurants, cuisines, from buffet to five-star chef, Michelin level to everything else, you've also experienced with me in the last couple of years, and I don't get to do this with guests. I try not to dwell on this at all, but you're a good referee. How do you describe meeting Native American chiefs, figures from India, angels, Mary, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha? Do you, just to be very gentle on this topic for audience members, is it just different flows of energy with wonderful personalities that are ready to help answers? I mean, how would you tackle this? And how, when you go, you live in such a beautiful setting, Arizona, and around you in Scottsdale, I forget if it's 3 or 5 peaks, you've got a name for it, and it's a very famous spot. When you go on the trail, do you take the guides with you? Do you just make sure you're present enough to enjoy, when you're ready, a little conversation back and forth? Do you ask for a good hike? That's not the thumb and it's not the rattlesnake. I know about those. Tell us about those too. But talk to us a little bit more about the flavor, what people can bring in beyond just their own stillness, the heart, enjoying the moment more, being present. Talk to us more about some of the stuff you've experienced in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, generally speaking, you can bring in those other influences, whether you want to call them angels or guides or helpers or whatever. You can bring them in anytime you want. My experience over the past 50 some odd years is that I don't really need to make a conscious intention to do that. It happens spontaneously. In fact, most of the stuff that has happened to me over the years has been spontaneous. I've never really tried to have these visions. I've never tried to have these out-of-body experiences or these remote scenes or, the different experiences like that. They've always just been spontaneous and just an extension of my practice. And so when I'm hiking and doing various things, I don't really set the intention to bring them along and as company, but sometimes they just appear. And I usually get the sense of the energy. Sometimes I'll see them. But for me, it's mostly an exchange of energy. I'm very sensitive to different energies. And I can really, is a barometer? Is a barometer sensitive?
Yeah.
So I guess I'm sort of like a barometer. I can tell which way the weather's going to go, but with energy. And so a lot of times when I'm hiking on the Sunrise Trail, which is my favorite trail, overlooking the 4 peaks.
That's it.
Which is a mountain range. It used to be a huge volcano in the distance from Sunrise, and it blew its top, and what was left was 4 peaks, and the Native Americans in the area consider it to be a holy place. So I'm always looking at the 4 peaks as I'm hiking. Yeah, so I just sense that they're there. I can feel the energy, and sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not. It's always certainly it's always fun to feel like an old friend is there. I'm big on those 3 letters, FUN. To me, a big part of the human experience and understanding the human experience is just having fun.
Yeah, well, I know in 2 years we haven't laughed a single time. So exactly. How about this? I'm going to have you in a second. Put yourself in the shoes of someone out there who knows they're sensitive, or just they take it on the chin all the time. It could be at work. They go into a supermarket and they're almost like They avoid loud conversations. You know, somebody honks a horn. I think that came up the other day in another conversation, and they're on edge for hours because they felt it, and they felt what was behind the honking of the horn. So in a moment, and I'll distract you with a question about Stargate, but in a moment, I'd like for you to give some advice, very practical, what a person, 3 steps they could do before they exit the house. They've got to go to the supermarket, how to set better energetic boundaries. You've had to live it. You've had to teach it. Give us a really practical example in a second, but Stargate, give us one war story, one example. Did they hold up a triangle in California? You were in Florida and they had you remote viewing on a turned the other way. Was it a triangle? Was it a circle? Was it a rectangle? Were you trying to spot which type of cigar Fidel Castro was smoking? Give us one war story back in the day and approximate the year. You're well out of the program. You got out of it fast. It was a remote viewing program, CIA, US government, all this stuff. And it's so many years ago. Now it's probably fine to talk about it. But what could you share that's a cute war story that, you know, somebody who's more into that is going to start laughing about and be like, oh my God, that was a good one.
What you mean with Stargate? I wasn't in it long enough to really have any war stories. I think the year was 1972. I had been having for 2 or 3 years remote viewing experiences in the form of, I would get this vision of like a television screen inside my head. And if I was able to focus my attention and hold it in one place long enough, I'd be able to go wherever I wanted to go. In the beginning stages, it was like there were tides or currents out there, quote unquote, in the universe, that would just move me, you know, to different places. And until I was able to focus and control my attention, which happens also to be the centerpiece of mindfulness. So it applies out there, quote unquote, as well as right here. Once I was able to really focus my attention, I was able to go wherever I wanted to go and watch that screen and go to different places. I think in 1971, 72, I met a guy who was a psychologist. He was a teacher at Duke University. He lived nearby me, and a friend of mine told me that he was a real interesting guy. I should meet him. Went to meet him. We discussed some of my experiences, and he introduced me to the Stargate project, which was a classified government project at the time. They had a location in New York City, and so I went in a few times and did some preliminary work with them. I met a very, very interesting guy who was really the best that I knew at remote viewing. His name was Ingo Swann. And he turned out to live a very, very interesting life. He wrote a fictional book about a person. I forget the name of the book, but it was really about his life. But he was afraid that if he wrote it as an autobiography, nobody would believe him. He has since passed away. But he was an interesting guy. I had fun interacting with him. But I was having all of those other experiences too. And doing the work at Stargate actually seemed boring to me. It felt like I was going back to kindergarten. And it's like, I didn't want to spend my time going here and going there. Frankly, at the time, I didn't know it was a government program. I didn't know they were spying. You know, I think it was developed originally as a response to the Russians being way ahead of us in the field of parapsychology. The Russians have always been interested in these things. America, not so much. So America needed to catch up. And so Stargate, I think, was an effort for America to catch up on what the Russians were doing in the field of parapsychology. But, you know, after a while, I just didn't, it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun, you know, and so I just said, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. And So I guess meeting Ingo was probably one of the high points of being there. I also, I look back now and I think of a couple scenes in Ghostbuster 1 and Ghostbuster 3 where Bill Murray is there doing like the remote viewing thing, and he has people connected up to an electrical buzzer, and when the guys are doing it, he buzzes them, but when the pretty girls are doing it, yes, that's right, whether it's right or wrong. And there was a scene like that in the first Ghostbuster in the beginning, and in the last Ghostbuster, the third Ghostbuster, right at the end. There was a scene like that, sort of like a spoof on the first Ghostbuster. Think about that every once in a while. But yeah, Stargate has since been declassified. I don't really talk about it too much, only because it wasn't really a big deal thing for me. It seemed like a big deal more so for other people than it was for me. And once again, for me, it was more like going back to kindergarten. But it was, in hindsight, looking back on it, it was interesting. It was interesting, at least, that the government was making some kind of effort to learn about these things.
That's incredible. The last little bit that you said, I love it. It's complementary to the effort, no matter what the effort was about at the detail level. My little journey, and only to take 10 seconds on this, I feel like I've backed my way into this, and I'm still backing up 10 or 11 years later. If I was a deer in 100 million headlights at the beginning, now it's 99.9. I've broken a few lamps in there just by mistake. And it's been a learning process this entire time. The big enchilada, my big realization, my big thing to pass along to the audience is just this. And I feel like I've had a chance to interact with now thousands and thousands and thousands of people, only helped a few thousand, but I've been rejected by about 7,000. I've had 3,500 yeses if I had to guess, from just seeing your energy on your fingers, auras, to bigger stuff, angels, a jinn, light beings, religious figures, non-religious figures. It's all the same. Where you put your focus is where you put your focus. And it's the safest thing I know to say to the audience member out there. You have this capacity for flowing energy like a Jedi, like a nuclear reactor in a way, but it's your heart. Just call it, if love's the fabric of the universe, or the flow, or it's interdimensional, or and this is where Paul can elaborate on this in a second. There's constant energetic flows in life, an entire scale, like almost like a giant harp. One direction, it only gets higher and higher vibration. You're more happy, you're more this, enthusiastic, positive, relaxing, enjoying. And the other is a little more painful, suffering, and so on. Wherever you choose to put yourself, you're owning it whether you know it or not. And the sooner you learn how to let go of the stuff up here and start tapping the hub, as he would say, the spokes, choose whichever spoke that works for the moment. Don't get too attached. Shift things up. That's the way that works. Paul, could you give us some of those examples now for how to set boundaries? You're leaving your house, you're going to a crowded space, a concert, a supermarket, maybe just your daily workplace. How can you be more conscious of keeping your energy intact, keeping the positivity that you naturally have every morning you wake up? What steps can you give our audience?
Yeah, I'll give you a very brief story about how I discovered this. Back in 1971, I became friendly with a guy in England who had written a number of books on the Kabbalah. And I described to him how I was empathetic to a fault. And what was happening was, if I was with somebody, I would pick up on their physical, mental, and emotional states of being. At first, I mistook it for my own physical, mental, and emotional states. And this includes people who were not well. They were ill, physically, mentally, emotionally, or one or the other, or a combination. So I would feel bad, but then I discovered that when they left, I would feel better again. But this was something that had developed over the years, but had come to a head when I met this guy. And he said, you're identifying with other people as being yourself, but they're not. And so he gave me this little exercise to do. He said, just imagine putting a blue cloak around you to protect you from the energy from other people. And that was fine. And it worked to a certain degree using the visualization. But then I found over the years that, once again, mindfulness worked even better. And the way that I discovered mindfulness worked in that sense to protect me from being over empathetic, I discovered that people who are over empathetic are susceptible to other people's energy, physical, mental, and emotional energy. And the reason that they become over empathetic is because they don't have a strong connection to their own body. They're not anchored in their own body. And so when they're not fully connected to their own body, they become susceptible to the energy of other people. Now, if they're lucky, they're with positive energy people and they feel good. But if they're unlucky, then they're with, people who are having issues physically, mentally, emotionally, and they begin to absorb that. I see that a lot with healthcare practitioners, doctors, nurses, mental health professionals, so forth and so on. And it's because they're not fully connected to their bodies, very simply, once again, getting back to first principles. So to the extent that you can connect and be present in your body, become fully embodied, you will lose that over empathy. You won't mistake other people's energy for yourself, and you'll just be able to be with your own energy. And in fact, at that point, you're giving out your good energy to other people. And so whether it's just something as simple as focusing your attention on your breath so that you can connect more fully to your body, doing something like that really gets you connected to your body, you'll find that that problem of identifying with other people's energy will go away. And you'll just identify with your energy. And once you identify with your energy, you become a positive force to other people in the world around you.
I love it. And I have to do a parallel, not exactly parallel, bit of storytelling at this end. I was on the East Coast forever doing New York City, and I had said never over my dead body would I ever move back to New York. It was probably the 80s that I said that, late 80s, graduating from Middlebury College. I'd already spent half a high school, half a college living on Governor's Island, a stone's throw away from Manhattan. I'd gotten a taste of the city, but I wanted to go to the West Coast, maybe Portland, Seattle, something like that. I said never. I ended up in New York. And the point of this was I hadn't lived in a home. So I bought a home in Austin, Texas later when I was working Wall Street, law firms, stuff like that. I had to do something, adult. And I bought a home in Austin, Texas, but I didn't know how to live in a home. That's going to sound a little weird, but 25 to 42 plus moves. I never viewed my space as my space to stick my elbows out and to own in a sort of parallel way. We've got energy expenditures happening every second of every day. You're never going to be perfect. You're not going to own every energy expenditure. You're still going to think. You're going to waste energy, period. Full enlightenment, no thinking, not in the cards for humans just yet. But so when it came to living in a new space in Austin, Texas, when I finally left New York, like 18 years later, I ended up moving there and never leaving. Hard to leave a big city, hard to leave what you know, hard to leave habits behind. I got to this house and I didn't know how to fill it. I didn't view it as space I should impose on. That's how I viewed it. And I had a shaman-like figure give me a list of things to do. Start cooking more, smells in the house, stick stuff up on the walls, lots of color, plants, do plants indoors and outdoors, get cooking, literally, but also with living itself. Get started living, breathing more and everything else. And so, exercise, I've been running for 40 years. So I view that as a challenge or an opportunity for all of us in all quadrants of our life, whether it's just cleaning a closet, taking a walk, hugging a tree, going for your trail walk, Again, I love that. I love when you do your walks. I love hearing about them, and I've gotten some photos, folks. He's even done a video testimonial for me on the website from that beautiful trail, the Three Peaks. I'm going to blow some sage your way. We did this before the show. I've done this for every guest. And if you're new to this, this is your chance to swing your arms out, step up out of your chair, do a turn, do the chubby checker, do anything to break your structure out there. If you're in New Zealand, Europe, America, Florida, you can smell sage smoke wherever you're at through 2 computer screens. And I'd love for Paul Sugar, our 50+ year mindfulness consciousness expert, who's been teaching a lot of folks a long time now, to use some words as he's smelling it. This is just regular sage, that sacred smoke smell, Native American a little bit, red-tailed hawk feather. You're already getting it, Paul? Yeah, you get that look. Send it wherever you'd like. Vocal cords, you've had to talk a lot today. I know, we put you through the ringer, and I appreciate it. We appreciate it. And send some to the wife as well. And then talk to us about how this is possible, how no limits exist, how maybe we want to use universal language, like scientific, interdimensional, transdimensional. The universe is just far bigger, the flows, than we're ever going to get by grasping it up here, but we still have to use words. Tell us a little bit why you could smell sage through 2 screens just now. And you've done this a lot with me over the last, I guess, year or so. I don't think I was doing it 2 years ago.
Yeah, so this is something I've discovered over the years, that we are multidimensional beings. So I spoke earlier about the realization that time and space don't exist as we believe them to exist. And so through my experiences, I've come to realize that and much more. And by much more, what I mean is that we exist on multiple levels, shall we say, multiple dimensions, and that we can experience things that to our 5 senses are not apparent. We can experience things if we're sensitive to these other dimensions. If we can, in a way, I kind of think of taking our 5 senses as a starting point and then expanding those 5 senses exponentially so that they begin to perceive things in a much broader area than we're normally accustomed to. And so to be more specific, to perceive things multidimensionally, where time and space don't matter. So if you're burning the sage where you are right now, then there's no reason why I can't smell it right here, because time and space have morphed for me into an experience where I'm able to have that smell take place. And this is, once again, something that I've discovered with remote teaching. And not just during COVID, I started remote teaching probably in 2007. And I discovered that lots of the experiences that are available to us in person are also available to us when we're not in person. In other words, they translate remotely. So using the internet, whether it's Zoom or whatever, the same energetics can be experienced as can be experienced in person. Now, in person is a little different for sure. They're different. In fact, I did a study with Duke University back, I think it was in 2007, to determine the effectiveness of teaching the 8-week MBSR program, mindfulness-based stress reduction program, remotely versus in person. And I was the guy who did the remote teaching, and then there was another guy from the University of Pennsylvania, a doctor from the University of Pennsylvania, who did the in-person teaching. And in the end, what was discovered was that the remote teaching was just as effective as the in-person teaching. Now, as with any research, there is a certain degree of subjectivity, and somebody could say, well, you're just a different kind of teacher than the guy from the UP. maybe yes, maybe no. But what it began to verify to me was that, in fact, this stuff does translate over the internet. And remote can be very, very effective. There's also some interesting studies being done by the Institute of Noetic Sciences along this line. They're a very interesting group in California that is really on the cutting edge of research when it comes to this particular field.
Well, the poor pen person didn't stand a chance, but not to get into that. Okay. You say, let's say on your website, if people go to your bio page, achieve without achieving, and that's a very Zen statement. Like you just did, catching the scent without catching the scent, or seeing without seeing is what I describe as when you see an angel, whether it's a ball of light or full on standing there with or without wings and you're chatting away, that's hearing without hearing. It's getting beyond the act to be just one with the soccer ball. We'll do it in a normal way that folks can follow along with. If you're on the soccer field, you're good at soccer, whether that was in 5th grade, high school, college, last week, and you're having that moment, like on the golf course, hole in one, you're one with the golf ball, you're one with the swing, you're letting go. There's something transcendental, we could say, about the moment, and that it becomes bigger than what we ordinarily would allow for. So talk to us about achieving without achieving. Being is just being. I'm not sure we're going to say being without being, but to be or not to be, Shakespeare. Talk to us just a last little bit to cap it out, then we'll do some chatting with angels, some Native American chiefs, Chogyam Trungpa Sai Baba, and so on. And then you'll regale us hopefully with a nice closing here, but tell us a little bit more about achieving without achieving.
Yeah, one of the many things I discovered in mindfulness, but actually looking back on it, I discovered it first in sports, was the idea of non-striving. And as I say, I first discovered it in sports. I've always been very athletically inclined. I love sports. I'm still doing yoga, Tai Chi, hiking, lots of stuff. I'm not as active with the contact sports as I used to be. Or the quick stop-start sports like baseball and tennis and basketball. But I found when I was doing sports that if I would just let go and not try to accomplish something in particular, it would be easier to accomplish it. And as soon as I tried, so for example, in baseball, as soon as I tried to hit a home run, there was just no way that I would hit that home run. But as soon as I stopped trying and just stayed in the moment and experienced the mechanics that I had practiced over and over again, just let go into my training, that's when I would hit the home run. And it was the same in any of the sports. And I found that sports, maybe one of the reasons sports is so popular nowadays is because it's such a parallel to life. It's such a great metaphor for life. Everything that works in sports works in life. And so in life, the ability to let go and that non-striving kind of attitude helps you to accomplish way more than if you were pushing, and striving and efforting and really trying so hard to accomplish things. The way to do it is you do your training, you prepare, and then you let go. And that's when things happen.
So acceptance of non-striving or non-strivance, to make up a word I'm borrowing again from your website, you can tell. But talk to us about, is Satori, and we're going to use lingo from either Buddhist circles, Indian cultural circles, it's the moment of oneness with all, the bubbles in the sink when I'm brushing my teeth. Samadhi, Satori, give us a couple other terms. I think Buddhists or Chogyam Trungpa would say suchness, perhaps, or nowness. I think I'm doing okay on this. But
yeah, it's good.
Are those elite, just rare moments once a decade, once a week, or are they right in line with being in our heart and being?
Well, those experiences are available in many different ways. I would say for most people, they get flashes of those experiences. Whether they're in this kind of path or not. If they're in this path, they probably get that kind of experience more often. and it becomes more common. Once again, we could also say flow states. This is really the experience of observing oneself and having the experience at the same time. So it's not just observing yourself doing something. It's not just experiencing yourself doing something. It's the bringing together of the observer and the experiencer that creates the flow state, the samadhi, and so forth and so on. And I've discovered that for the most part, that I can experience that state of consciousness 24/7. There are times when I realize I've kind of slipped away from it, fallen off the wagon, so to speak, but then I can get back I know how to get back on the wagon. And I think that's where practice comes in. I think that it's, and I don't know that you can just click into it permanently and that's it. I think that there's a tendency in a body, in our bodies, to maybe float in and out. But even once you're locked into it, I've discovered that there are still degrees of depth of experience. So you can be in, we could say, samadhi grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, but they're all samadhis. But what I've discovered is that there's an infinite number of grades of samadhi, qualities of samadhi. But I have experienced what I do believe to be the starting point, that ground of being. But from there, that's just the beginning. The ground of being is just the beginning.
Maybe we can make this the topic. We're going to talk to angels, an India figure, Tibetan Buddhist monk, passed over. Paul's super good at listening, and not to put any pressure on him, but maybe he can get some replies to pass along to all of us about actually how simple, how in front of us this opportunity is to just breathe more, allow more, be in your heart more. And I'll do one final just reminder that it is so simple in front of you. If you're a gardener and you're enjoying your gardening, not fire ants nipping at your ankles and you wore flip-flops that day, but you're enjoying your gardening, and the way time flows has changed. You're in with the tomato plants because you like hanging out with them. You're either picking tomatoes, you're taking care of the plants, or you're doing some other activity you're really into. That's all this is about in one sense. It's the opening of the openness. It's the door cracking open a little. And then there are nuances, becoming more aware of what's going on and going in different directions with it, perhaps. But I'm just going to make the point that I think everyone is experiencing more of this suchness, nowness, this presence, their being, but there's a resistance up here to let go. There's a desire to control. There's a desire to ignore. It is the Plato's cave analogy. We'll have to include Plato in this today. It's the Plato's cave analogy, but let's ditch the cage. Let's do a jail cell instead. You're standing in a jail cell, lots of iron bars out of a Western. You've got a window that's nice and big with bars. You're looking at a bunch of kids playing kickball out there, and you want to be out there playing kickball. You're holding onto the bars. You refuse to look back. That's the brain, and see that the door is wide open, and you could have joined in the kickball anytime you want. Can you go from here to here and walk through that door? That the jail cell was never locked. You're completely capable the whole time. That's, to me, the Plato's metaphor. You're going to talk to Plato for us, and if in a past life we've crossed paths before and it was Plato, I will offer my half of the picture. I remain many, centuries later, a super slow student, and I will leave it at that. Let's do an angel joy that we're very familiar with. And if you want to put your hand out, Paul, and feel through two screens, the audience can do the same thing. They can put their palm out, and ironically, they may feel sparkle on their toes, on their back, top of their head, a hand on the shoulder, a wind in the room, smell Maui, the ocean. They may just feel on their palms, their fingertips. My only rule or structure in 10 or 11 years is just give yourself permission to let go. And if you don't mind asking angels to help you out, your ball of light, let's go simple. They can jump into your ball of light and interfere a little in a nice way, but they won't do so without you inviting them. So just be like, hey, angels, get me out of my head, into my heart. Make this nice. Amen, rock and roll. Thank you. Om Sai Ram. Own your intent. Think Elf with Will Ferrell. the world's greatest cup of coffee. If you will it to be so, maybe you're going to get the greatest cup of coffee. Maybe not the best example, but set your intent. Paul, why don't you ask Joy what she has for us all today, especially on the being and maybe a little bit how to have more joy in our lives? What are you getting from Joy?
Well, I think what I'm getting is a big smile, and insofar as maybe there's a sense that we've been talking about these things already, which is the letting go, the acceptance, the just being in the moment and appreciating what's coming to us from moment to moment. And I think that's kind of like the energy that I get from all those experiences with the angels and guides and so forth and so on, which then, after a while, I kind of feel like it's the same energy as me. The two energies kind of merge together, and I sort of like become my own angel. And so maybe, I just had this thought, maybe it's like angels. You used the metaphor of the match before, where you light the match and then the heat from the match will light you up. And then you sort of become your own match and your own angel. So maybe that's the image that I'm kind of getting there, is that these angels, their purpose is to light us up so that we can be our own source of energy, our own angel, so to speak.
Well, let's go gas stovetop blue with Charlotte.
You've been watching the news too, right?
Yeah. And let's have her, just as much as you can allow for, have her give you a crystal clear, just short couple of words, a quick bit of advice, whatever you'll allow for, whatever she'll want to pass on.
I'm getting the word openness. Just being open to these kinds of experiences, even though our culture tells us that, there's some resistance there. But I find that, our culture is opening up. Speaking of openness, our culture is opening up to these kinds of experiences. And I think that we're just sort of at the beginning of this kind of experience, this kind of work, really becoming a big thing.
Okay, and I'm going to put Sai Baba up, the one from India from 100 years ago. If you'd like to catch the smell of India, wherever you are watching, or Paul, if you'd like to catch the scent of incense from India and ask for a positive vibe, a flow of energy from Sai Baba, just say, got it when you got it. A hug, a flow of energy, an Indian wind in the room. Just say, got it when you got that.
Got it.
Good. And then just privately, you get an answer from Sai Baba. You don't have to share it out loud, but just some insight or good job or something, compliment maybe.
Yeah, I got that right. I got a very similar thing that you got.
Good.
Keep on keeping on.
Oh, I love it. And he was able to add to the repertoire. I've never said that. Keep on keeping on. I like that. Okay, Gentle Frank or Chogyam Trungpa, classic Tibetan Buddhist monk. A young photo of him. He insisted on the young photo. Let's have Chogyam Trungpa pass along something. Same thing. If you'd like to have him share a suggestion, he might just give you a vision of brushing your teeth or going for a walk. What is an activity we can all try to strive a little bit more to be aware about, be in our heart and just enjoy the moment on?
Well, I'm getting the word kindness. So being and showing kindness to ourselves and to those around us.
Yeah, and I do love the following two statements. You can be happy now in this very moment without a single reason. Angels said that, and that challenges everything we know.
Right.
Because we have, right. But my situation is, my problem is, this happened to me, that drama, this relationship, my career situation, and we're back to the bicycle wheel, the spokes, and the center. And also there was something else with him, but we'll get back to that. Okay, Native American chief, dull knife, wisdom with some humor like a mountain range. And anything you want to share out loud, get a hug, get some support, get your batteries recharged. You just did a lot today.
I've been getting his name coming to me a lot lately, for some reason. Glad you showed me his picture.
And then we'll do Geronimo. I'll do older Geronimo, then we'll wrap it up with Plato. I think that's very fitting. No hugs from him. Fist pump, tap on the shoulder. They're sweaty hugs. A lot of people get into the hugging. I always tell people one hug's worth 100 questions. And they sort of blow that off. They get so into the zone, acting without acting, interacting without interacting with angels and guides, that they forget about the no hug thing. Then they come back to me later and they're like, oh my God, it was sweaty. And I'm like, I told you it was sweaty. Here's Geronimo older. And you live on Geronimo Trail, if I recall.
Yeah, Geronimo Road.
That's it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Geronimo every day.
Yeah, and he's very laser-like. He's much less formal, proper, like the other two, Red Shirt and Dull Knife, yes, no, those guys are formal and proper. He's much more like slang. Yeah, nah, duh. You already know the answer, just do it. Can you relay something Geronimo's telling you for all of us to wrap this up? We'll do Plato next.
Well, I'm just getting, he's sort of steering us to stay the course and to sort of take off on what you said. There's plenty of buts, but to stay the course.
Oh, I love it. Okay, Plato. Now, I don't usually do this one, but on the shows, but also it's a very new show. So you can see the old man's face if you look, just sort of right there, the mustache, the eyes. Plato, the philosopher.
I see that.
And go ahead and Paul and just connect. It can be private for you, or it can be something for all of us. He is so masterful, though, at talking life stages, about helping a person let go and be more aware of their surroundings, but also in terms of their surroundings in life and how to navigate a little bit more efficiently so they're in their heart more. Plato is so fantastic for that.
Kindness seems to be a theme running through here. It's, to me, and from what I'm getting, is that kindness is the expression of love.
And I do believe Plato said, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a harder battle than you. That means you would have to be in your heart to recognize other people's situations and to go lighter with a capital L. It's the same thing in Buddhism, or that Buddha quote, and I'm going to slaughter this one, but I'll still get it. 2 logs in a nighttime flood. You are hanging onto one. We don't know each other. I'm hanging onto the other. And our logs bump in the middle of the night. And we're talking a river that's gone 100 feet over its banks in every direction. Is it flotsam? It's damage everywhere. It's raging waters. Our logs bump. You're holding onto yours. I'm holding onto mine. What's the proper salutation is the quote. How do you greet another human being on their journey? How do you even bridge? Now, if you're a total empath and we're flipping this, you've already greeted them. You've felt all their pain, their suffering, their joy, their conditions. But I'm talking the normal way of you run into a human being. And that is why I love the concept of saying hi to a complete stranger. Wave, even a smile can lift someone's spirits. You never will have an understanding of how much you impacted that person in their day by sending a little bit of kindness, a little bit of love, a high vibe to the other person.
Yeah, for sure. It's, what's that? The Native American walking in somebody else's moccasins.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you greet them with kindness.
So with that, why don't you give us a last uplifting bit of insight? Is it tell us about tapping our inner kindness, our inner wisdom. It's already there. We've practiced it all our lives. Half the time we don't give ourselves credit. or we're negative about it. We think we can't, we're cut off, we don't experience love, we don't know how to do this, we don't know how to do that. That's just the ego talking. Give us a pep talk on how it's all right in front of us, but it's even more in front of us by being, it's us.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You like you do many times, you sort of take the words right out of me. I was gonna,
Sorry.
I was gonna say it's already there, and the heart and the mind and the body, all of that is interconnected. And when you're working on all cylinders, then they're all working together and bringing you into that state of being where kindness is a gift to you and everybody else around you.
Would you like to take a last final exercise? This is almost unique, but I think we've done this on one other show. Would you like to go into the role of an Indian guru? And the second I said that, toss it out. Would you like to raise your vibe a little beyond even where it's at now, only the highest intention, and put a palm out to the audience, only the highest intention, only compassion, love, saying hello to a stranger? Would you allow for folks to only feel and let angels do all the work, and India figures and Plato, let them do the lifting for you? You're barricaded up, your personal being. But can you share a little bit of kindness and love? If you know how a guru sitting in front at a temple or a ashram or wherever, they send love out to the crowd. Could you do something so that if I'm sitting at home watching this on my YouTube or on my TV in my living room, I could put my hand up and feel Paul Sugar's energy? But again, setting it only at the highest level of compassion and love, universal love, and letting all those figures, angels, let's let Dull Knife just say that it's a good idea so you hear it.
Okay.
Okay, so put a hand or two out if you would, and let's let the audience have a last attempt at something here to feel your energy. I'll put mine out, but I'm going to only go the highest intent. I'm doing a circular structured movement to break my structure. I'll see if I can feel. Oh yeah, Paul, I felt you. There you go. But we'll let everybody else, if you have to do this or go put your hand over a candle, but don't burn your hand, just to make sure it's working. Give yourself permission to let go. Feel Paul's vibe. And then get in touch with Paul just to tell him he did a fabulous job. Do it in the comment section here. Hit the subscribe button. And that'll almost wrap it up. Paul, if you want to just sit for a second, I want to thank you again for having been so phenomenal. Good word, the last 2 years. Can't believe it's been 2 years. I have to tell the audience again, Paul has had a beautiful journey develop that's still developing. He has experienced and met many people. He's helped many people. He's still helping many people. Great nature about him, his suchness. It's the suchness that we all share that he just shared with you. So if you can find a way to check out his offerings, do so. Please put some positive comments, what you enjoyed most about his sharing, his experiences. Put it in the comment section. Be sure to subscribe so we can have lots more Paul Sugars out there. But this is Paul Sugar in Scottsdale, Arizona. And the name of his institute, again, is the Scottsdale Institute for Health and Medicine Center for Mindfulness. I should have had this memorized years ago. Again, he's been certified in MBSR a bunch of different ways. University of California, San Diego, the medical center there. Back up in UMass, I think Amherst or one of those places. John Kabat-Zinn trained and so on. Fantastic expert, fantastic resource. Check out his website, stressbeaters.com. Paul, anything else that you'd like to add for 2023, looking forward for those watching right now?
No, I just want to say what a pleasure it is always to spend time with you. And I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my life's experience with everybody out there.
Well, I love it. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to chatting with you privately, and then perhaps having you back on when it's appropriate and you tell me, we've got stuff to talk about, which I think is pretty much all the time. We could always talk forever. Paul Sugar, thank you very much for being on Angels, Positivity and Love. I hope the audience enjoyed it. Please share this with others who are interested in mindfulness, consciousness, just tapping the heart. Let's keep it simple. and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.